For the third offseason in a row, Nebraska's going to bring in a transfer quarterback. The first time they went into the portal, Scott Frost came out with Casey Thompson, who completed 63% of his passes for almost 2,500 yards. But last year, Matt Rhule wasn't as lucky. Now, with a top 15 defense bringing back 70% of their production, the stakes are way higher. Land a QB who can lead a game-winning drive, and we could be talking about an 8+ win team, but swing and miss again, and we'll have to pray they hit 6. With dozens of entrants into the portal, they'll have to sort through a lot of names, but today we'll talk about 6 realistic options that Matt Rhule will or should go after to be his starting QB in 2024. But what's up, guys? I'm Connor Hayden, and this is Corn Crazed. If you're a fan of Nebraska or the Big Ten, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss my live stream where I'll update you on the search. And if you think there's at least one legit starting QB out there, hit the like button to help us get to 1,000. But now, let's get into it.
He's hit and set. He's taking a shot downfield, wide open end zone, caught, touchdown.
Matt Rhule talks a lot about wanting to get to the point where he can recruit a guy out of high school, get him adjusted to the culture, and bring him along in their system for 4 years. And that makes a lot of sense for the most part. When you look at Michigan, Washington, Bama, or Texas's two deep, at least 75% are guys they started building relationships with when they recruited them out of high school. But quarterback's a different story. Can you guess how many teams in the top 25 have a transfer QB either starting or got brought in to compete for the job? 19. And how many of the top 10 offenses are led by a transfer quarterback? 6. Okay, last one. Of the last 6 QBs that won the Heisman, including this season, since we know he's coming from the portal, how many of them were transfers? Every single one. It's the new wave in college football. These dudes got to go to a school, find out they're in the wrong system or that the coach is like somebody else, and then after a couple years getting some experience, they transfer into an offense that fits their skill set. Bo Nix struggled as a passer at Auburn, and he never had more than 2,500 yards passing, but this year at Oregon, he went for over 4,000. Jaden Daniels had a 32-13 TD to interception ratio in 3 years at Arizona State, but at LSU, he completed over 70% of his passes and threw 57 touchdowns with only 7 picks. And these are just 2 success stories. Go look at Michael Penix, DJ Uiagalelei, Sam Hartman, or Haynes King. They all left one Power 5 school for another, and they all fit way better with their new teams. And I'm not here to argue whether all this is good or bad for college football, because it doesn't matter. It's happening whether you like it or not. And Nebraska's well aware of how all this works. Noah Vedral, Adrian Martinez, Luke McCaffrey, and Logan Smothers all left for better situations. Casey Thompson, Chuba Purdy, and Jeff Sims all came to Lincoln looking for a fresh start. And back in the spring, those 3 were all expected to compete for the chance to be QB1. Now we look ahead to 2024. Jeff Sims isn't an option, and he might leave as a grad transfer. Harbur's going to try to get developed, but the odds he ever starts at QB again are really slim. And Purdy's a stud with potential, but the reality is he's been dealing with a bunch of injuries ever since he came to Nebraska. And if they bring in a couple of portal guys, he might not make it, and he might not want to stay. That means Rhule's best case is Purdy competes for a starting job against a transfer. Harburg's the number 3, and Daniel Kalen comes in as a true freshman in red shirts. But that sounds a little risky, so hopefully he goes into the portal and gets 2 guys. One with promise and who has some extra years to get developed, and then a ready-to-go starter, the guy with experience who knows what it takes to win. And this sounds like a great plan, but like Rhule said in the presser last week, it's not that easy. First, you got to find a guy who wants to come to Nebraska and who wants to play in this offense. Then you got to get $1 or $2 million or whatever it takes to get him to sign on. And this isn't the only staff out there looking. I saw at least 6 legit contenders next year who are going to be a QB away from being a legit playoff threat. USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, and Florida State are all willing to spend more money in the portal than Nebraska will. And I'd be shocked if the 1890 Collective would match an NIL offer that any of those Tier 1 schools would make. Then you've got the second tier schools, Washington, A&M, Miami, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Auburn, South Carolina. They all want transfer quarterbacks too, which means there's going to be at least 13 schools looking through the portal with Nebraska. So they better have a good pitch. I was looking at the portal rankings this morning, and there are already 20 former starting QBs in there looking for a new home. Some are already pretty locked in with new schools. Cam Ward's going to go to a contender like Ohio State, USC, or Florida State since he's a top 3 QB who's ready to win a championship. It sounds like Riley Leonard's a lock to go to Notre Dame, and Aiden Childs is probably going to follow Jonathan Smith from Oregon State to MSU. But those are just a few of the big names, and Nebraska's going to go after somebody they know fits with their offense. So in no particular order, let's talk about the 6 potential targets who Matt Rhule is, will, or should recruit to come lead his offense next year. First, ranking in the top 5 of the portal is Will Howard from Kansas State, who started 19 games in the last 2 years and completed 60% of his passes for almost 4,300 yards and 39 touchdowns. He's 6'5", 240, and he can run, but there's no doubt he would have been the best passer on this year's team by a long shot, and he'd be one of the top 6 QBs in the Big Ten next year, even if he is playing in a run-heavy offense. They beat TCU for the Big 12 championship last season with Howard as their starter, and just a month ago, he threw for 327 yards and 4 touchdowns in Austin in a 3-point loss to Texas. So there's no question that Will Howard's as proven as anybody else in the portal right now. Satterfield's already been to Manhattan to meet with him, but so has Wisconsin, Miami, and USC. So maybe it comes down to money, or maybe he decides based on who he thinks can get him to the NFL. But either way, he's got to be Nebraska's #1 target as it stands today. Next in the top 10 is Tyler Van Dyke. Yeah, he got benched at Miami a few weeks back, but their offense wasn't that good, and he was a victim of his circumstances. In 30 games, he completed 64% of his passes for almost 7,500 yards and 54 touchdowns. And it's worth noting that in his first 19 games, he only threw 11 picks, and in the last 11, he threw 12. But I think with the right coaching, he's going to get back to his original form when he won ACC Freshman of the Year. I just don't know how much I'd trust Satterfield to patch up the interception issue, or if he's going to be further down on the list because of it. The reality is he never got in rhythm because he had to play for 3 different OCs, and he finished with a 15-13 record as the starter, but he's still got a ton of experience and would be a day 1 starter because of that. High up on the list, and a QB Rhule's rumored to be meeting with today, is Sam Leavitt from Michigan State. This dude fits the Nebraska offense. He fits the profile of what Matt Rhule's looking for since he's still got 4 years of eligibility after redshirting this season, and he's already played in 4 Big Ten games. Leavitt's from Portland, and he was the #2 QB in the state coming out of high school, but neither of the Oregon schools offered him a scholarship, so he ended up in the Big Ten. And as soon as Jonathan Smith was announced as their new head coach, he knew he didn't want to play for a coach who didn't respect him enough to offer him last year. On3 ranks him in the top 15 of the transfer QB rankings, but I think it's hard to know how good he really is since he only threw 23 passes and ran it 13 times in the 4 games he played. He's a dual threat with as good of an arm or better than anybody on Nebraska's roster, but because he hasn't been a full-time starter, you're not sure how high his ceiling is, and he's not coming in with proven or game-winning experience you'd get with a multi-year starter. Blake Shapen's a different story. He comes in with 3 years of starting experience from Baylor, and he's been a pretty consistent passer, but he hasn't won that many games recently. He threw for 5,500 yards, 36 touchdowns with 13 interceptions, and has a 64% completion rate, which makes him a pretty good option for any school that needs a 1-year guy to come in and manage the offense. But he's only 6 foot and maybe 200 pounds, so I'm not sure if he's big enough to take the hits in the Big Ten, running the ball as much as Nebraska quarterbacks are asked to. He was honorable mention all Big 12 last year, so he's a great backup choice if Rhule can't land his top targets, but I'd predict he ends up with an ACC or a Big 12 team where his size won't be as much of a factor. MJ Morris is another young guy with limited experience, but he shined in the few games he played. As a true freshman at NC State, he came off the bench and threw 3 touchdowns to beat Virginia Tech, and then he did it again to beat a top 20 Wake. He's got 3 years of eligibility left, but he's not like Leavitt, who could come in for a year and sit and wait while an experienced starter led the offense. I think Morris expects to be the starter, and he's got the resume to back it up. It's just a question of whether or not Rhule would risk letting a guy who's only played 9 games and completed 58% of his passes take the reins that early. And last is Ohio State's Kyle McCord, who was good this year, but not Ohio State good. He was a 5-star QB out of high school and now ranks in the top 8 in the portal. This year he threw for over 3,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions, but one of those picks was in the only game that mattered just 2 weeks ago, and I'd argue that play was the dagger to his career in Columbus. He's not much of a runner, so I'm not sure if Rhule would want him leading the offense, but he is a winner, and he's one of the best passers available who would come in with elite knowledge and game experience. So I guess he's going to be pretty expensive, but if Rhule wants a proven winner, there's nobody on the list with a better winning resume. There are other guys out there like DJ Ungalele, Will Rogers, KJ Jefferson, Dante Moore, and Dylan Gabriel, but they're either locked in with another school or they're going to be soon since they're such hot commodities. And honestly, Nebraska's not ready to take the best quarterback available. Their offense is still limited. The receivers are young, and even though there's potential, it'd be disrespectful for a guy like Will Rogers to go to a school where he doesn't have the weapons he deserves. My dream scenario would be Will Howard as a 1-year fix and Sam Leavitt coming in as a change of pace guy who could develop to take over once Howard leaves. It gives Satterfield 2 solid options in case one got injured, and it gives Rhule the assurance that he won't have to go back to the portal next season as long as he can turn Kalen into a viable option. I gave you my realistic targets because I think this staff's going to move quick. I don't think they want to wait until late December to lock their starter in. They need to know ASAP since they probably need 2, and other coaches are calling their phones just as much as Nebraska will. We're down to our last bit of merch and the sizes are limited. So if you want 35% off anything on the site, use discount code CC35 and I'll leave the site up for about 2 more weeks before I take it down for the off season. And I want to shout out Character Chronicles for sponsoring our show all season and for helping me to create as much content as I've been able to. Adam's YouTube channel is getting close to 12K subscribers, and he's been pumping out a ton of videos in the past week. So if you want to get more Nebraska football updates and reactions, click the description box below to find the website link to characterchronicles.com, and you'll find all of his videos there. In my last video, I said I thought this staff takes 5 portal guys max. So if 2 scholarships go to QBs, that leaves 3 spots for a linebacker, receiver, and a tackle. And if you want a couple names to look at for the types of guys Rhule would want to fill those spots, check out Chris Brazel from Tulane, who's got 3 years of eligibility left after catching 44 passes for 700 yards and 5 TDs. And linebacker Jayshawn Barham, who's got 2 years left after recording 95 tackles, 9.5 for loss, and 7 sacks in 2 years at Maryland. I'm not saying they're going to get either of these 2 guys, but if they do, the Kool-Aid is going to be flowing heavy come January. But I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comments below. Who's your favorite QB on the list we talked about today? Will Rhule land 2 of them, or does he have to settle with 1 and hope that Purdy stays healthy for 1 more year? And if Nebraska does get a transfer QB with a proven arm, how many games do you think this team wins next year? I honestly think this can be an 8 or 9 win team with a healthy QB room that doesn't turn it over. I just won't believe it until I see it, because this turnover issue still falls on the coaches since it wasn't just Jeff Sims. But that's all I've got for today. So until next time, thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Go Big Red.